Working on that solar plexus, that power. Working on that solar plexus, that power. Divine rise, blessed be to your day. May it be everything you require to create everything that you desire. Generational wealth. Generational wealth. I'm sitting there playing with buttons. All right, yeah. Generational wealth. Generational wealth is the byproduct of emotional literacy. Generational wealth is the byproduct of emotional literacy. Until we understand this key aspect, we don't understand exactly what we have inherited and what others will inherit from us as we move forward. Survival equals debt, and trauma breeds liabilities. I've talked about the liability mindset versus becoming the asset. You being the brand, you being the brand, you being in that space. So I always ask a question: if right now you transitioned and you left, you was done, you transitioned, what would your inheritance look like? Remember, what would your inheritance look like? And if I now have an understanding that generational wealth is the byproduct of emotional literacy, I now understand for myself, I now understand that I know the reason why I can never keep anything, and I always was in a state of trying to I was always in this mentality. Remember, we talked about the doing me mentality. I was always in the mentality that I always could get more, or if I applied to the pressure, or my plans were under pressure, my thoughts were under pressure, then it would give me my edge. A lot of us think this way. We think just because we are in we think because we're in the position, but we don't really understand the position that we are in. A lot of times we do not understand. A lot of times we understand, we know we're in a certain position, but we don't understand the very position that we are in. One of the major keys to that. I learned from myself, like going through these processes of the things that I've been learning over the last year and a half of building that emotional literacy and understanding that that's the currency. That's the true aspects of the currency. Everything else is a byproduct. It doesn't matter how much money I accumulate. If my emotional balances are not in order, then those balances cannot remain in order. I will always find a reason to overspend. I will always overspend. I will always put myself in a position to where I'm applying to a pressure. A lot of the times when it comes to the trauma breeding the liabilities, we're going to start with that. The trauma breeding liabilities. When we're stuck in this position of trauma breeding liabilities, it's this constant state of, as long as we have not dealt with the original inheritances that we inherited from our mothers, we inherited from our fathers, in that soul contract, in that karmic debt, if we're not addressing these aspects, we're not addressing our emotional wounds, we're not learning how to have a conversation, we're not learning how to have these conversations with ourselves, then every time that we step into a position where we can actually build something, it's not going to be based on trust. It's always going to be based on survival. From the space of survival, it's maintenance and attachment. It's maintenance and attachment. I noticed for myself, and a lot of times when I was in spaces that I didn't build since I didn't build the trust with myself, since I didn't build the accountability with myself, the responsibilities within myself, the structure of this healing inside of myself, my emotional competencies, I realized that what I thought was trust was actually maintenance. And what I thought was support was actually control. A lot of times we look at these narratives of our great great grandparents, our grandparents, and our mothers, and all of these aspects, and we're like, I want that type of relationship. But when I look back at these relationships, from my mother to my mother's mother and all of these aspects, I realized that it was based on maintenance and control. It wasn't based on trust and support. It was based on maintenance and control. Maintaining the necessities and having control over the emotional attachment. A lot of us find ourselves in these spaces where we're dependent upon the maintenance of the emotional attachment, the projection of our thoughts, the acting in our feelings. So when we come into this space of what we're saying is love, if you love me this, if you love me that, if you love me this, we miss the point of everything else is a byproduct of your emotions. So everything else is a contract that is signed based in you building that trust. When we think about when we think about the emotional aspects in that space, and you're thinking about building that trust, you're thinking about setting up that account, you're thinking about setting up that LLC mentality, you're thinking about, okay, cool, I'm gonna do that. I got my LLC mentality going on, got my LLC mentality popping in and cracking in. Okay, cool. I know that I am now the owner, I am now the operator, I am now the worker. That's my platform to myself. So now that I do this in a synonymous factor, as I'm learning how to become the owner, that means I got to take ownership of my emotional catalyst. I have to first go to that boardroom, go to that table, sit with myself, and have that conversation with the identities that I created. And basically, I have to clear house. That was my mindset in the earlier parts of my shadow work. Once I became the owner, once I was able to say that I was a God, and I talked about this in the God Hour show. Once I said I was a God, I was in the mindset of I'm the original, I'm the creator. That means I now have to go to this table with all of the identities that I created based on my emotional attachments, based on my emotional wounds, and I gotta be like, yo, all of y'all are fired. I had to go in and clear it. I had to go clean house. That's one of the visualizations. I had to go in, yo, I like everybody that was here. I was on some New Jack City. I did the New Jack City thing. I like everybody's here. All of you guys played an important role in the building of this company, but I have to clear house. We gotta get this in order. That's the ownership mentality. Until I did this, and when I didn't notice when I did this, I noticed that my conversations were different. Remember, I've been talking about these conversations. My conversations were different. I was always in a position of bias. I was always in a position of pressure. I was always trying to use the pressure to form my solutions. I was always trying to use the pressure to build things off of the pressure. You can't build under pressure. You can't plan under pressure. You can't do anything under pressure. Pressure is natural. If you're under the pressure, then when you make a plan, that means when the pressure subsides, the plan no longer is going to be in effect. You plan for the pressure. That's the aspect of when you going through your emotional triggers and going through these phases with yourself. A lot of times we get into these phases, my earlier parts of my healing process, it was a lot of avoidance wounds that I had to first deal with. That's the only way I could build trust. I couldn't build trust because I was stuck in a state of avoidance. I couldn't build trust because I was still stuck in a place of neglect. The only thing that I could write up an application for or sign up for was maintaining my narrative, maintaining my emotional attachments, maintaining my emotional behaviors. So as I behaved, as I reacted, I always had something to lock me in, be like, okay, cool, this is my behavior. So I found myself stuck until I sat there with myself and like, yo, you're not stuck. You are just locked into a certain amount. You're locked into certain emotional behaviors. You're locked into the emotional behaviors. You were doing you. You were setting the tone. You were going through your trauma responses. That's that state of you staying in that trauma response. As long as you're staying in your states of the trauma, you're not dealing with these traumas, you're not dealing with these events, you're not dealing with these memories, you're not dealing with these deeper aspects, you're always going to breed a liability. You're always going to be in a state of breeding a liability. You're always going to be in a state of, you're always going to be set in a predestination of trying to prove something you're going to be trying to prove something in the space that you're in without acknowledging the current of why you're there. Trust without love is no support. That trust, you're building a trust with yourself. Once you understand the trust with yourself, that's when you understand synonymously that trust factor in trusting yourself, in knowing yourself, trusting yourself, and being vulnerable with yourself is being open to learn. It's being open to learn. So you got to get out of your mind resistance. A lot of us, we got into that program of the cycle. We got to be the resistance. We got to resist. What are you resisting but your own shadow? That line by itself made you resist your own shadow. Because everything outside of you is a aspect of your shadow. Everything that triggers you is only projection of your that attention. I'm a better word it. Attention is from attachment based on a projection. Attention based on attachment is based in attachment from a projection. That projection or that emotional catalyst or that aspect, that memory gives light to this projection, which gives your inner child the attention, which has you attaching to more attention. So you only are used to getting attention based on your reactions. But if somebody sits and responds, you don't know how to deal with it. Because that's what love is. Love is that honoring that thought. Someone can look at you and they can honor your thought. They can listen to what you say, take it in, step back, and they can honor your thought. But we're used to that predestination complex. I was used to a predestination complex. If you would have hit me up 4 or 5 years ago and you would have asked me the question, what am I leaving as an inheritance for the little ones? I would look at you and I wouldn't know what to say. I would be like, I would think in my mind, I'm like, well, they gonna have, but in reality, it goes into this cycle with ourselves of that generational wealth. We keep thinking it's about the aspects of the money. The money is only the byproduct. The house, the cars, all of that's the byproduct. None of that's going to stand if there's no trust, love, and support. That's why when your grandmother had that house in the family for multiple generations, and then Uncle Rerun or Pookie, Cousin Pookie, or the female cousin that y'all really don't like, as soon as she got the house, she sold it. That happened to me. I remember one of my traumatic experiences was, I remember when my mother and my mom and my pops first got together and they had a house, and my aunt was sending the money. They were supposed to be my aunt was taking the money and paying the rent for them because she knew the person. I remember one day it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I remember this. I was 10. I was 10. Yeah, just going on 10. I remember at 3:45 a.m. in the morning that that the sheriff showed up to the door. And they were like, you guys got to get out. Because none of the payments were being made. She was just pocketing the money. In that same space, my grandmother's house, what she thought that she owned free and clear, went under that same thing. The payments weren't being made on the land. So this goes into the aspects based on survival versus love. Survival versus love. When you understand that you were raised under survival, as I looked at it, they were raised under survival because my aunt was only thinking about surviving as herself. Survival makes you a lot. So as long as you're stuck within survival, you'll always require debt because your trauma responses are going to keep you in a state of being a liability. That means you will only create liabilities. And when you think about creating liabilities, that means everybody's for game as being a liability. That makes you think about relation versus relation in that trauma aspect versus the aspect of love, support, and trust. Because you can say, but it was all love, but it wasn't love. It was based on survival. She was maintaining her lifestyle. It goes back. She was maintaining her lifestyle based on attachments and projecting from that to keep that projection going, that she was in that space. But when it boiled down to it, that's one of the things that I had to deal with. When we're looking at these things when we're looking at these aspects of our traumas, and we're so quick to be like, it's this fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. They're only a byproduct of the trauma response. That's all it is. It's a behavior. They're only a byproduct. Everything inside of your space in a physical, as it's devolving, is only based on behavior. The motions. That's why when you get stuck in that, and I've talked about that before, that 12 by 12 mentality, or your job, work, your job, the hours you work equals what you get paid, and now you're stepping into this LLC mentality. It doesn't mean that you got to stop working your job. It means that you're going to be coming into a deeper space of ownership with yourself. That means you're taking on the asset approach. You're understanding that everything works for you. Once I started understanding that everything works for me, there was no reason for me to be upset anymore. It was no reason for me to feel the pressure anymore. And then going through that process. Because until I understood that, I always felt pressured. I always felt pressure to do this, or do that, or do this, not say this, and I would minimize the conversation with myself. I wasn't building any trust with myself because I was dependent upon maintaining an identity in a certain space because I was still living through trauma responses. I was still living through the wound. I was still living through the attachment. I was afraid for motherfuckers to be upset with me. I was afraid for people to show their emotional aspects towards me. I was afraid of it. As the moment that they would say something, I would quickly try to recirculate and put myself in a position to create an identity based on the attachment to attach to that space. So I'd be like, yeah, but, so yeah, we can do it. No. LLC mentality. I need a plan set before me. I have a goal set before me. I have a path set before me. I'm not trying to do what happened. I'm not trying to go through the aspects or repeat something that I've just learned from. You only repeat what you have not learned. I learned that in an example with my mother, using my mother as an example, my mother's been renting her house. My mother's been renting her house for the last 12 years. My mom's rent right now is $925. That means every year she spends about 11 grand on a house. She spends about 11 grand on a house. She gives them 11 grand. If she got to resign that lease, she missed a payment, that 11 grand is gone. So now in my mindset, LLC mentality is, if I could build up 11 grand and learn this aspect of the system, I could become a first time buyer. That's 25,000. That's like 25 to $50,000 credit that they'll give to that with that 11,000. At the end of the year, they're gonna give me another $2,000 credit in that build, and then I can own the house and I can leverage the house. I'm gonna go even deeper with the LLC mentality. If I have that 11 grand, or if I make the necessary points, and this is the key, the necessary points of sacrifice to make more like, to take myself out of this liability approach, that means really sitting there with myself and really looking at my environment. Does it match where I'm trying to reach to? LLC mentality, get an LLC. I have my LLC mentality, and we're gonna get into this on Friday tomorrow. LLC mentality, get the house through the company, pay it off through the company, learn how to leverage it through the company, and now it's collateral of the company. That means for every year that it appreciates, that equity automatically is now in my account, my business account. From that point, now I can go grab that life insurance policy. This type of stuff, this is the type of stuff we're going to be talking about in the Co-Alchemy Secret Society, by the way. And that's coming soon. That's going to be a subscription. It's a whole nother thing. But now I got that. Now I can go get that life insurance policy. Go get a life insurance policy. Drop that policy into another LLC or my trust. And now I have an account. Now I have a trust account. Now I'm paying off that life insurance policy. I've allotted what money's come out of this account and what it's used for, whether it's the trust fund for the kids, the bank account for the kids, something for, now I can write it off at the end of the year. Every time I take something out of that account, I can write it off. Now that's based on the balance of my emotional literacy. Understanding that that trust is based on the love, and that's going to bring the support to my space. Instead of me looking at it as I'm trying to catch up, I'm only trying to do it based on the way my mother did it, the way my pops did it, the way my family did it for years, and staying stuck within the position. You, me, us, you're in charge. You're in charge. You are the owner. Once you say that you are a god, once you say that you're a goddess, what are you doing? What are you creating? If you want to say you're a king and a queen, that's your physical aspect in one interpretation. The king and the queen only survey. That's your inner child. Your inner child is the royalty. That's the one that rises. That's the rising sun. That's the path of the Haru. Bringing these things in a deeper context to use them instead of saying, they're only an aspect of your shadow. They're the most refractive point. The only reason that you can't go into that room and you can't get what you're trying to get is because you haven't took ownership of yourself. That ownership mentality changes your whole spectrum of thought. The way that you approach things, the way that you put yourself in a certain position, the way that you have those conversations, the way that you keep yourself in a certain balance, it changes it. It changes it. That changed me forever. The experiences that led up to me, that means that being invoked into my mind, I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for those moments. Because if that moment didn't happen, and I didn't own that moment, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I couldn't be building as I'm building now. I couldn't bring this to us now. I couldn't provide inner child healing and true aspects of healing. And then given that basis of, as I'm doing the healing work on one aspect, I'm building something else. That's the creator. Once you've already created your purpose, created in this position, me as a healer, me as a teacher, me as a counselor, this is the one position of, okay, this is how you get to me on this level. Once you're at this level, I'm building something else. I want you to be, that's why I always will say, I want you to be great. I want you to break limitations. That way, when you're like, ooh, what's he doing next? What can I do next? That's the only way we're going to connect. Anything else is based on attachment. Anything else is based on maintaining the necessities. You got to do that shit anyway. A lot of the stuff that you're trying to get knocked into, you got to do that anyway. With or without anybody being there. With or without your kids, with or without your man, with or without your girl, you're going to have to do the things you got to do anyway. Period. Once I embraced that, I was like, I can't use the same narrative. I can't use the same manipulation tactics. I learned what I inherited from my mother was passive-aggressive avoidance wounds. What I inherited from my pops was avoidance wounds and in this false sense of manipulation. That's what I inherited. I had to accept my inheritance. I had to accept my inheritance in order to accept me. Once I accepted my inheritance and I started accepting and acknowledging me in that space, it changed everything. Because now how I approach things, way different. I'm not approaching from the mindset of speaking through my wounds. I'm not approaching from the mindset of speaking from frustration. I've talked about it before. I'm a manifestor generator. Frustration is not me. I'm meant to invoke. I'm meant to spark. I'm meant to shoot. I'm meant to stimulate that thought process. That's why I used to get, when I was little, I used to get bored so fucking fast. When I was like 2 or 3, all I used to watch was commercials. I've talked about this before in lectures. All I used to watch was commercials. Why did I always used to watch commercials? I found out later on, I was like, in a commercial is about 30 seconds to a minute. And it's a lot of information packed into one space. I was training myself in order to extract everything out of small space. Okay, that's what you need to learn how to do. It's not going to be this large picture that you're trying to grab. Everything has to be broken down. So you got to break down what is generational wealth. It's emotional literacy. Until I have emotional literacy, I can't even take on the steps or even learn financial literacy. So if I can't take an emotional literacy, that means I'm always going to be in doubt, scared, insecurity, all these jealousies and all these aspects. Then when I take on financial literacy to try to build something, it's always going to be based on that wound. I'm building out of jealousy. I'm building out of insecurity. I'm building out of doubt. I'm building out of something. Instead of me building out of my now. Instead of me building out of my truth. Instead of building out of my trust. Instead of building out of my love. Instead of building out of my support. This is your levels to your learning yourself. I want you to be the fucking best. And speaking of, we really went there. This week's episode on the God Hour podcast, we got into the anchors or archons or your emotional attachments. This week's session was broken down. We break it down into 3 segments. If you're not tuned into the God Hour podcast, links is all over my page. We got into detrimental interest. That means staying in a position based on coping mechanisms, escapisms, and a false sense of authority. That means you yelling. That means I'm this, so I get to know. We got into provisional chemistry. That means you're using the interest of others to mask your emotional attachments and then avoiding that void. And tomorrow, Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're getting into Wishful Master. As I play with my keys over here, I'm going to give y'all the description. It's up now on my page. As we go in here real quick. But that's going to be your key. Until you have that relationship set with yourself, and this is one of the biggest things that I had to learn, until you have that relationship set with yourself, until you have that balance with yourself, you're always going to face things based on reaction. That means you're always going to be overdrawing your account. Once I stopped overdrawing my account, my emotional account, trying to keep everything in my space, it changed everything. But yes, this Friday night, we are getting into Wishful Master. The storybook of visuals we connect to in the unconscious stream of what is wishful thinking. Our emotional attachments play our wish masters. What we repress in our memories are the framework that laid for our emotional attachments to feed upon. We're going to be getting into wishful thinking, the story of the beginning, led by our triggers, and the spaces we create. Wishful thinking is the foundation of beliefs based on what we might seem pleasing to me that makes you feel good, rather than the evidence. A lot of us go into these spaces with ourselves where we're trying to build based on our belief. I believe if I do this, then everything, instead of looking at the evidence that's coming into that space. It's evident that you're hurt. It's evident that you have a wound. It's evident that you have some things to deal with. That's why the triggers present themselves. And we're going to get into vicarious trauma. That's going to be a deep aspect to it by itself. Vicarious trauma, also known as secondary trauma. It can be described as an indirect exposure to a traumatic event through first-hand accounts or narrative of an event. That's what we keep getting stuck in. A lot of us we're in vicarious trauma. We're going to do a whole build on that Friday night, tomorrow, Friday night, Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. Tune in. I'll see you in class. Q&A, we do the Q&A, live readings, donation-based. Come in, get that lesson, and let's build. I want you to be the best. I desire you to be the best. I desire you to tap into everything that's great for you. Everything great for you is in the internal aspects of you understanding these wounds. Stop avoiding. Stop avoiding. Stop avoiding because something's making you feel good, but it's not making you feel better. And we don't get into all of that. I want you to be the best. Everything from readings, setting up that shadow work consultation, so we can see where we need to start at. You need that help with that inner child work healing, the inner child healing, the emotional attachment healing, slew of everything else. GottaCoalchemistLLC.com or hit me up in the inbox. Share this video. Share the video. If you know somebody that needs some of that work, that needs that attention, that needs that attention to that detail. That's what I'm here for. As always, I love you. We love us. Ashe.